Shortly after moving into the Maison Mouton, Sickert's tranquility was shattered. Christine lost her battle with tuberculosis, the illness that had plagued her throughout her life. She died on the 13th of October 1920. Sickert felt as if he was digesting granite. Embattled, all but destroyed by the loss of his young wife, he shaved his head. In 1922, he returned to a London full of what he called paleo-stuffers, fossils from the Victorian age, and neo-stinkers, the new generation who'd embraced the sharp edges of modernism. Sickert belonged in neither camp. The artist became increasingly dependent on another old pupil, Thérèse Lesaur. In Brighton in 1926, he married Lainey, as he liked to call her. The same year, Sickert suffered a serious breakdown in his health. Sickert proved indomitable. He emerged from his depression in an entirely new guise, and as if to mark his determination to reinvent himself, he changed his name. He dropped Walter and called himself Richard Sickert from now on. The final phase of his work would be marked by bold experimentation and surprising new developments. Almost without exception, Sickert used only photographic sources for the rest of his life. Photography, according to the artist, was like alcohol, only to be used by those who don't need it. And for Sickert, it was never a prop. Snap taken, film developed, photos selected, cropped, and squared up onto canvas. The process may have been mechanical, but the idea was revolutionary. Sickert marked his resurrection with a trio of biblical self-portraits. The servant of Abraham, the artist's head threatens to burst out of the frame, like a small fragment of a colossal picture. Lazarus breaks his fast of 1927, craving food after his resurrection, consumed by his appetites. Finally, the raising of Lazarus on a monumental scale. A professional photographer was hired. A mannequin was shrouded by an undertaker. This time, Sickert takes on the role of Christ, breathing life back into Lazarus. The composition is impossible. Lazarus suspended mid-air, Christ levitating above him. More Frankenstein than New Testament. The picture was triumphantly received when exhibited in the Royal Academy in 1932. Sickert was now, according to a headline, our greatest living painter. In January the following year, Germany's own resurrector became Chancellor. Hitler's aim? To raise his nation back from the dead. Storm clouds were gathering. Throughout the 30s, Sickert produced a series of pictures that seemed to yearn for an England long gone. The artist faithfully copied or transcribed Victorian illustrations from the magazines of his youth. Some thought Sickert's pictures sentimental, even idiotic. But he breathed new life into dead images with a garish palette. The English echoes are not an indication of Sickert's failing powers, as is being increasingly recognized today.
I just thought that the echo was a great word to describe something that's fading away. I experienced it, but as time goes by, it just becomes a nostalgic reflection.
Like Sickert, artist Keith Coventry turns to found images and the art of the past for the sources of his work. He produced his own series, The Echoes of Albany, to document the time he spent living in the exclusive Mayfair apartment block of the same name.
Sickert was accused of being nostalgic when he painted The Echoes. But in a way, the irony is that out of that maybe nostalgic looking back at the past, he created what I think is some of the most modern pictures by squaring up, by faithfully reproducing what was in every square. It makes the painting more abstract because he's only looking at it like one square at a time. And so, because of that, you get an incredible two-dimensionality. I just think that risk-taking element and the idea of appropriation, which is something that we seem to think is a very modern thing. But for Sickert, I mean, it was really, back in 1930, it must have seemed quite shocking.
During the early 30s, the spectacle of flight captured the public imagination. And Amelia Earhart, the first woman to complete a solo crossing of the Atlantic, was front-page news. The Daily Sketch celebrated her triumphant arrival in London. Sickert based the picture on a press photograph of Miss Earhart's arrival, and he painted it so fast that within a week of the publication of that newspaper, his picture was on display. Typical late Sickert marketing. Here they are, the hard-bitten journos, in their trench coats and their trilbies, braving the rain, the English weather, the grey sky. There's the wing of the aeroplane. But where's Amelia Earhart herself? You have to struggle to find her. Sickert's chosen as his template the picture in which her image was most occluded and obscured. There she is, but you have to look to find her. This little ghostly profile framed right at the margin of the picture. I think he's painting very much ahead of his time. I think he's thinking about the nature of celebrity, the nature of global fame in this world of the new mass media, and what it does to a person. In a sense, you could say he's examining exactly the same phenomenon that Andy Warhol was looking at in his multiple Marilyn Monroe paintings of the 1960s, which were all about the way in which a person disappears into the multiple images of their fame, the way in which celebrity abolishes or annihilates the human being at its vortex, at its centre. And I think there's a kind of irony to this title, Miss Earhart's Arrival. Because what Sickert's saying is that at the very moment that you arrive in terms of world fame, you actually begin to disappear. The artist as alchemist, his studio a workshop where the base matter of mass-produced images is transformed into gold. Sickert churned out his copies of the physical world. And these transcriptions, as he called them, were increasingly executed not by the artist himself, but by his wife, Thérèse. Uncannily prescient in style, their subjects also foretell the inevitable slide towards another world war. King Edward VIII, still in mourning for his dead father. The end of the old era. The next ushered in. But the king is frozen in motion, caught on the back foot, Britain pensive in the face of an uncertain future. In the same year, perhaps most prescient of all. Il Barone Aloisi, a dejected old man set against a flooded world. The Italian diplomat's glory days far behind him. Aloisi exits the conference after the collapse of talks on the invasion of Abyssinia, an event that paved the way for World War II. Sickert knew that the writing was on the wall. He taught none other than Winston Churchill to paint. Years later, when the Sickerts found themselves hard up, the politician would repay the favour, arranging to have his old friend's pension supplemented. The Sickerts retired to Bathampton in 1938. He painted the view from his window, from a photograph, of course. As the mood darkened, Sickert deployed his own increasingly black sense of humour. He sang Deutschland über alles in the bathtub, within earshot of his painting students. His opinions on fascism ran typically against the grain. He claimed to approve of the Italian invasion of Abyssinia, and he sent a letter to Hitler himself, offering to teach him how to paint. A courteous reply came back. The offer was never taken up. In old age, Sickert cultivated the persona of the eccentric, senile artist. It was the last of his roles. He didn't live to see the full atrocity of World War II, perhaps for the best. On the 22nd of January 1942, Richard Sickert died peacefully in his favourite chair. Walter had been dead for years. By the time of his death, Walter Sickert's position was assured. He'd painted sides of urban life few were willing to face, and in the process given British art a new language of expression. Without him, the art of Bacon and Freud is unimaginable. And as for his alter ego Richard, when he died, his place wasn't so certain. His transcriptions baffled many contemporaries, but now seem deeply prophetic of a world saturated by mechanical reproductions. In fact, in his various guises, Sickert was probably the most influential British painter of the 20th century. His life may have been theatrical, but it was more than a passing show. Lift your head. After 10 years, you will see you are one amongst thousands. Another 10 years, among hundreds. On, and one day, a Monday or a Tuesday, with a peacock's feather of luck, you may do better than you know.
Stay with us here on BBC4 for this week's world movie premiere. Frida Pinto stars in Trishna, directed by Michael Winterbottom, next.